All right, all right. Welcome to this next episode of the Victory Podcast, where we explore life, leadership, and journey. I'm so excited for this next guest. She's a fellow teammate and awesome A-10 Warthog pilot, Kim Casey Campbell. She's a retired Air Force colonel who's flown almost 2,000 hours in the A-10 Warthog, where she's also completed over 100 combat missions supporting those ground troops, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And she was also awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in 2003 for her heroic efforts of flying a highly damaged aircraft home. And we will get into that story later into the podcast. But for now, I just want to jump right into it. So, Kim, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And thank you for being a part of our team here at Victory Strategies as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. I'm excited to be part of the Victory Strategies team. I'm obviously brand new to the team, but I'm excited to be part of it. It's a great group of people, really passionate about what they do. So I'm excited about this journey.
Yeah, we are too. And she's also, I'll just add that she's part of our power couple. So her husband, Scott Campbell, has been on our team for a number of years now, and he has a podcast. If you want to go down in the library and see his interview as well, fairly telling. So please tell us kind of how it all started for you. Where you grew up, what your family life was like, and how you found yourself into the Air Force and what that journey was like for you.
Sure. I grew up in San Jose, California, and my dad was actually in the Air Force, and he had gone to the Air Force Academy. I didn't actually know much about that because I didn't really grow up as an Air Force brat. My dad got out of the Air Force right about the time that I was born. But about fifth grade time frame, this was 1986, and I was watching the Space Shuttle Challenger launch. And there was something that happened. Obviously, the destruction of the Challenger and that disaster, for whatever reason, connected me in a way that I didn't understand at the time. I just felt so connected with the astronauts and really trying to understand this idea of wanting to give of yourself and to do something that you believed in so strongly that you would be willing to give your life. There was also something about this power of flight and the freedom that comes with flight that really intrigued me. And so I started talking to my parents about it. And that's when I started to learn more about my dad and his background. And he said, well, a lot of the astronauts tend to be pilots, and a lot of them come out of the Air Force's Academy. And I think within weeks, I decided I was going to the Air Force Academy. I was going to be a fighter pilot and then ideally go on to be an astronaut. So interesting start.
Yeah, and if you're willing to kind of share your age when that was transformative, because I remember the Space Shuttle Challenger. I mean, we were watching it at school in the cafeteria at the
Yeah.
time. I think I was in eighth grade, and it was a huge impact to me.
Yeah, it
And
was fifth
that was,
grade for
that
me.
was that was the teacher flight. That was when it was
Yeah.
just so
Krista
exciting.
McAuliffe.
Kristen
Hmm.
McAuliffe, yeah, yeah. So that was fifth grade for you, and then
Hmm.
as you started kind of understanding that step into becoming an astronaut, if that's sort of what the initial vision was, and that commitment to start heading in that direction, what age was that when you started to say like, okay, I'm start to build the plan to kind of walk that journey?
So I made that decision really in 5th grade, and
Wow,
I know,
that's
and,
amazing.
my parents were incredibly thankful because prior to that, school was like this thing that I endured. I wasn't super interested in it, and suddenly, as middle school and high school went on, I poured myself into different activities and really working on the grades, and I joined the Civil Air Patrol to start learning about the Air Force, and so it was just this complete pivot in my life from what I was, kind of interested in school. I just put everything into it because I knew how hard it was going to be to get into the Air Force Academy.
That's incredible. So parents listening out there, pay attention. Your children are really never too young to be exposed to those kind of things. And,
Oh,
I'll
yeah.
just share quickly, my oldest daughter, Samantha, she's a junior at Dartmouth College right now, which is a prestigious school, was very hard to get into the year that she applied. And she was introduced to that school in the fifth grade. She
Yeah.
toured the campus and just kind of fell in love with it. And she went to revisit it a few times. And similar path to you is like she recognized what was going to be ahead of her, and she just doubled down on all of her academics and knocked it out of the park to get there. So So parents, take note of that. Kim Campbell's an amazing example of that determination and how youth and inspiration can kind of tie into allowing her to fulfill her dream. So congratulations, that's amazing.
Well, I have to give it to my parents, and they're, I guess, shielding me in some ways because they didn't tell me at the time that women couldn't be fighter pilots. So in
Ooh.
1986, there was still a ban on women being fighter pilots, and I don't ever remember having that conversation with them. They were just like, if this is what you want, then go after it. In high school, I started to understand that there might actually be a problem here. There was a combat ban on women being fighter pilots, and I just didn't let it get to me. I had mentors and coaches and really supportive people that just kept saying, if it's what you want, go after it. And then that ban was lifted by the time I got to the Air Force Academy.
Yeah. And then so what was that environment like at the Air Force Academy? Because, I have to suspect that you're looking for some mentors, and you had some mentors, but wanting to pivot and be directly engaged in those combat forces, at that time there were probably very few, if any, female pilots that could really truly mentor you in that regard. So what was that like for you?
I didn't have anybody that looked like me. I didn't
Wow.
there were no women around. There were very few women anyway, but women fighter pilots were just, it wasn't a thing. It was not, there wasn't somebody there that I could really talk to about it. And so I had mentors at the academy. I had a chief master sergeant a woman who was exceptional, really teach me most about leadership and learning from your senior enlisted and learning to take the feedback. And so it wasn't from a flying perspective, it was more from a leadership
Leadership.
perspective where I found those mentors.
And that warms my heart. Those senior enlisted leaders that sort of have there's a freedom for us to approach things in a way because especially a chief master sergeant in Air Force, she's not going to be making E10, so she can really call things the way that she sees them, and it's such a powerful tool. And the military, we're so lucky to kind of have that sort of structure in the military that's difficult to find and replicate in the private sector.
Yeah, she didn't hold back, and I'm thankful for that. I mean, she was very honest and straightforward with me, and to have that experience as a young cadet meant
Oh,
that.
so this was in your cadet years
Oh
that
yeah,
you
this
formed in
was in
that
my
relationship.
cadet years that I
Nice.
met Chief Robinson, and she was just tremendous, and so that really influenced the rest of my Air Force career and learning the importance of relying on our experts, even if you might outrank them, they're still the experts. They've been there, they've done it, and especially when a chief talks to you, it's time to listen. It's time
Mhm.
to listen to what they have to say because they have a tremendous amount of experience. So I'm thankful. That was an early lesson for me, but she was definitely one of my mentors at the Air Force Academy.
I love that Chief Robinson. You ever stay in touch with her at all?
We stayed in touch for a while, and we have lost touch over the years. I've been trying to find her, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's it's
Yeah,
on.
she may be of the age that she's not on LinkedIn.
No, I haven't found her on any of the social media. So
Yeah, there's nothing like reaching back out to mentors and telling them how much you appreciate them, being able to recognize that. And I stayed in touch with my um, Navy recruiter all the way till like today. I can still message John and he'll respond. It's just remarkable to have those types of long term relationships. They're so cool.
it's nice to reach out and say thank you. My liaison officer, who is the person that helped me get into the Air Force Academy, which was a bit of a struggle because it didn't quite turn out like I planned. I actually got a rejection letter from the Air Force Academy,
Oh,
which is the only, I mean, that is what I wanted. That's what I worked for. And I got a rejection letter. And thankfully, my liaison officer just said, Kim, if this is what you want, go for it, which was kind of a repeat occurrence for me. I kept hearing this, Kim, if it's what you want, go for it. Like, you're going to face rejection, you're going to face these hard things, go after it. And
yes.
he suggested that I write letters to the academy. Just, he said, let them know you're still interested. And so every week, I wrote a letter to the Air Force Academy to let them know that I had done more push-ups or got an A on a test, something to let them know that if somebody else turned their appointment down, I was ready. And I finally got my acceptance letter a few weeks before I was supposed to go to the Air Force Academy. And so it paid off. But having that supportive network, those coaches, those people around you was so important.
That's amazing. And like you were all in. I mean, had you
Oh,
applied
yeah.
to a safety school at that point, or you were just like, I'm going to the Guy Strong Air Force Academy?
My parents made me apply to those safety schools. So I did have alternative plans, but only because my parents strongly suggested it.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, I'm going through the college application process with my second daughter now, and it's always tumultuous. 7 schools she's applied to, and tracking all those things, and then the roller coaster ride of rejection letters and
Yeah.
expectations. Those are all going to be coming in the next month. I'm not looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's
But yeah,
hard. But, facing that rejection early and just realizing that if there's something that you want, you gotta keep going for it, and that's what I've tried to mentor all the young cadets and students that have reached out to me is that you will face the word no. You will face these challenges, and if you want it, then go for it. Keep after it, even if it's hard. You just gotta keep
yeah,
pressing.
and I have to imagine that pathway, the rejection letter, how you must have felt when you read that after all the hard work and
Ugh.
dedication from 5th grade,
Yeah, I was crushed. I
just being
mean, devastated. I it just
yeah.
yeah, I remember actually the moment because I ran to the mailbox, like, it was my daily tradition was to go to the mailbox, and I was always looking for the, Air Force Academy logo on the envelope and saw this envelope, and maybe I should have cued in, it was a small envelope, not a big one, and, but opening it and reading it and saying it's essentially said I wasn't good enough, and that's really hard to hear, you know? "Thank you, it was competitive, but you didn't make the cut," like, ooh, that hurt, that was really hard to hear because I had worked so hard, I had put everything into it, but, getting the acceptance letter, on the other hand, was the total opposite of just the same I wasn't racing to the mailbox anymore, it was just a surprise of
Yeah,
getting that letter, and it said, "Hey, congratulations, you're accepted, you'll report in 3 weeks," was essentially what it said.
that's amazing. I mean, I gotta tell you, like, I've got goosebumps thinking about that story because, like, you are beginning your career with adversity,
Yeah,
grit, and determination, you know, showing focus, and more importantly, how much you believed in yourself
yeah.
at that age is like just incredible. Still got goosebumps. Crazy.
I often, like, think back to this, what if I had quit, right? What if I had just given up and not worked harder to improve? I mean, I think about all the opportunities that I would have missed. I know my life would have ended very differently. So, in many ways, it was a good way to start. And I know that sounds easy now, right? It was incredibly painful at the time, but those hard things make us the people that we are. And so I don't regret it. I don't regret that it happened. It's part of who I am.
Yeah, and so this next question might be difficult, and I apologize in advance, but so you get the acceptance letter, you show up to the Air Force Academy. What's going on in your internal dialogue? Was there any sense of unworthiness, like you didn't, the little imposter syndrome, like you weren't as good as everybody else because you got accepted so late? Or were
No,
you able to
it was
turn
the
that around and be
opposite.
like, God darn it, I absolutely deserve to be here, mofos. Let's go.
That was it. I was like, I worked my ass off to get here, and now I'm going to prove to you that I earned it, that I belong here. And so I just put everything I had into being at the academy. I took on leadership positions. I worked as hard as I could at the academics. I wanted to excel. I felt like I had to prove a little bit that I earned this, that I was good enough to be there. And my senior year at the academy, I took on the position of cadet wing commander. I was a position that I had to interview and compete for. But the cadet wing commander is responsible for all 4,000 cadets. It's the highest ranking cadet at the academy. So to come from being rejected to go to that and then graduating overall as the number one cadet in the military order of merit, I was like, all right, do you believe me now? Like, I earned this.
Yeah.
So there was a bit of proving myself.
No, but that mindset is so important, and I love that you're turned it around in that way. I myself, from different portions of my career and whatnot, I'll even call it suffer from imposter syndrome, and it's such a buzzword these days. Everybody's talking about overcoming it and like, oh, you're worthy. But it's like, it is a way to pivot someone into a victimhood mentality when you say, "Oh, well, imposter syndrome is normal, most people experience it." No, no. It's like you've done the work, you know what you want and you're driving towards. It's you. You are choosing to drive to it. Don't let other outside influences or the perceptions of others drive how you value yourself. Because I think that's what it is when you sort of accept the imposter syndrome and you got to overcome it. You're already devaluing yourself in that regard. And, I think my generation and your generation was brought up with that grit and determination. It like, hey, when somebody says no, you just look for the next opportunity, and it's like, and I'm glad that
Yeah.
you pivoted at such a young age. And I think that probably helped with your trajectory through the rest, especially graduating with the honors that you did, like, boom, chest out, shoulders high,
Yeah.
superwoman pose, like, all right, people. What's next? What's next? What planes you gonna let me fly now? So let's go there, right?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that there's been these, negative thoughts that, I've certainly had those moments of, questioning and doubt over the course of my career, for sure. I mean, I don't know, maybe I think we all do, or at least I hope we do. It makes me feel
Right.
better.
At least I hope we all do.
Right. And it's just about turning that sometimes doubt that you feel into reminding yourself that you worked hard, you earned this, you're credible. Being the only female in a fighter squadron for years, there was always, I'd have those moments of doubt, walking into the squadron, especially on the first day. But over time, I was like, you know what? I earned this. I am a good pilot. I have worked hard and I have a good attitude. I know I can be part of this team. And so it's just kind of reminding yourself, I don't know, self-coaching, self-pep talk, whatever you like to call it, but it's a reminder of, you know, if you put in the work and you do the homework, then turn the voice off, turn it off. You've earned it. You've
Turn
put in the
the
work.
voice off. I love
Easier
that.
said than done, I know.
Turn the voice off. No, that is written down.
It's something I got to
So
remind myself over time. So,
all of us.
yeah.
So you graduating top of your class, I have to assume that that comes with some sort of action of entitlement for choice of orders or anything like that. So how did that work for you? Choosing where to go, what airframes you're looking to qualify in, and whatnot.
It allowed me to have a choice of where I wanted to go in terms of my career field. It also gave me the opportunity to go to graduate school for 2 years. I went to England on a Marshall Scholarship. So I spent 2 years in the United Kingdom doing a master's in international security studies and then an MBA, which was just a tremendous opportunity. And that opportunity came about because I had done well academically and I'd done well militarily. But then I also got the opportunity to go to pilot training, which is what I was there for in the first place.
Fantastic. And so pilot training, what was that like? And how many women were going through simultaneously with you? I mean, I know you had mentioned that you were the only woman in the squadron that you're attached to, but how about the training pipeline and all those things? What was that
The training
atmosphere?
pipeline was a little bit different. I mean, women had been flying for several years, just not combat fighter aircraft. And so the training environment was very different. I had several women in my class. There were women instructors. There weren't a lot, but it was still probably on par with the 12% of women that I saw at the Air Force Academy. But again, I worked so hard to get there. I put myself all into pilot training, and really it's a very competitive process. If you want a fighter, if you want the fighter of your choice, then you're going to have to work hard. And so yes, you're competing against your classmates, but you're also working together and supporting each other to kind of get through that difficult time. In the end, it is based on how well you perform, but the instructors are also looking at your attitude and how you fit in with a team, because you have to be part of the team to do well in any squadron you go to. And so it was a great opportunity to kind of see how that competitive but supportive and collaborative environment worked.
Interesting. And like going through that, you know, process, if you will, is part of, are they also looking at your kind of personality traits? And because I'm sure different airframes have different, sort of drivers of how the person's going to be performed or behave based on because the missions are different, right? And so personality, as you and I know, plays a part
Yeah.
in the mission. So is that sort of the calculus at all on how they make selections?
I think it you kind of self-select over time in that 6 months in, they decide who's going to fighters, who's going to heavy aircraft, and who's going to helicopters. And so there is some personality, but it's almost everyone kind of based on their own experience decides some of where they want to go, and then some of it is the instructors decide where you're the right fit. But the majority of it is based on your performance. I think the other thing that they're looking at is how you deal with failure, how you deal with stress. Because in pilot training, inevitably, no matter how well you do, there are going to be moments of failure. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be times where they tell you to sit down, you're not flying today because you haven't put in the effort. And my biggest failure in pilot training came on my very last ride in the program. And I had done fairly well in the program, and then on my very last ride, it was a formation ride, meaning we fly close to another aircraft in flight. And I went into it very confident, ready to go. And as I was in this tight formation, my visor on my helmet started fogging up. And I just got nervous because couldn't see all the things that I normally see. It was just probably because once I'd started fogging up, now I'm breathing harder and I'm getting nervous and it's just kind of tumbling. And I finally told the instructor in the back seat what was going on, that I was having trouble seeing out of the visor. It was fogged up. And he said, "No problem. Move away from the airplane, clean it off, and get back in." Very calm, very controlled. And so I did. But when I got back in tight formation, all I kept thinking about was the last several minutes of the flight where I probably made mistakes, I wasn't in the right formation. Instead of focusing on the here and now, I was like 30 seconds behind. And I continued to make more mistakes because I wasn't focused. And we got back from that ride, and I remember my instructor saying, "Kim, that was not a good ride." And of course, I knew. I mean, I knew it was coming, and I got several downgrades and marks on my grade sheet. But he had a couple of the fighter pilots come over to talk to me afterwards, and they said, "Kim, I'm glad you're learning this lesson now,
Mm,
because you cannot let that happen. If you are going to be a fighter pilot and you want to be a fighter pilot, then in those moments of stress, you have got to acknowledge it. If you make a mistake, don't let it happen again, and then let it go and focus on the next 30 seconds." And I was, again, hard lesson in that moment. I did not do well on that ride. It was the worst I had ever flown at pilot training, but what a lesson again to learn so early in my career. And so, when it came time to go to combat, like, that lesson stuck with me. I've made several mistakes. I have failed more than once in flight, in life. And it's in those moments, just acknowledge it, don't let it happen again, and then move on. So a lot of good lessons,
yeah.
but I think
So,
that's what they're looking for.
yeah. Well, 22 minutes in, second time you've given me goosebumps because that's perhaps one of the most important lessons that anybody can live in life.
Yeah.
We are built on our past experiences, and the study of what's happened in the past helps build the foundation of who we are and who we are to become. But holding on to any of that, no matter whether it's a positive or negative,
Yeah.
doesn't cause growth, and you
Right.
living in the moment, especially like you'd said, in stressful situations, the only way to be clear is to be in that moment and not thinking about the past and or even the expectation of the future causes anxiety and all those other things. And
Yeah.
it's a great way to get in flow state. And I think I had a number of experiences throughout my career where all of a sudden I was like, I just did that. Like if you asked me to do the replay, I couldn't tell you because I was in that total flow state of living in the now and all that training works out. And so being a fighter pilot and having that skill set of knowing like, okay, yep, that's just happened. I've got to put that in the Rolodex because we're going to debrief it later. But
Yeah.
I got stuff to do. I got people depending on me and I've got an aircraft to keep in flight and all those other things. So I want to ask you about flying the A-10, which
Yes,
I'll tell you is my favorite aircraft
mine
for
too.
two reasons. So it was one of the, I don't know, it was an early model that I built as a young kid, was the A10 Warthog, and it was the tank buster. And it was my favorite because it came, the model came with like all the, what the Warthog was capable of and what it had done like during Vietnam and everything else. And for a young boy, it was amazing because all the armament came along with this model. And when that thing was fully loaded, it was just like this thing can still fly with all
Yes.
those things. And then you fast forward to my career, having to call in a number of aircraft for gun runs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yeah, the A-10 has really got a warm place in my heart for being able to do, surface to, or air to ground support for our troops. Your turnaround times are quicker, your accuracy, your communication, all those things were like, when we had A-10s and the AC-130 was like, yeah, we are an unstoppable force. And
Yeah, we made a good team.
it's basically the angels over our heads, so we could do what we needed to do on the ground. So yeah, to share some of that experience with us of
Yeah, I
learning
love
the A-10
that.
and all that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that airplane. I mean, the reason I picked the A-10 was I love the mission. I mean, as we started at pilot training, we would talk about the missions of the different aircraft. I knew I wanted to fly fighters, but I didn't really knew which way I wanted to go until I started talking to other pilots. And this idea of close air support and supporting our troops on the ground, like to me, there was nothing better than that. And I realized maybe because of that formation ride or not, I didn't really like the air to air stuff. I really liked the low level missions, flying close to the ground. It was just that part of it was fun. But I just became attached to this mission. And so um, the opportunity to fly the A-10 was, once I finally got there and went through all the training and was able to get in the airplane for the very first time, it's a single seat fighter. So the first time you hop into that airplane, you're solo. And you'll have an instructor tucked in right behind you, but taking off and flying that airplane for the first time was just it was kinda like everything that I had worked for. I'm like, I'm finally doing it, I'm finally that idea of being a fighter pilot, I'm finally here. That was my first mission, which for A-10 pilots, you're not actually an A-10 pilot on that first mission because you haven't shot the gun yet. And so you're not really a true A-10 pilot until you shoot the gun on the airplane. And that's when we give the new students their A-10 patches. And I remember that
And
ride
which
very
gun are we
clearly.
talking about? Yeah.
What's
Tell
that?
us a little bit about that. Which
Yeah,
gun are we talking about?
well, the
Give the audience a
A-10
little.
yeah, the A-10 gun is a 30 millimeter Gatling gun, and so it is I mean, it's the bread and butter of the A-10. The entire airplane is built around the gun, it's 19-foot long, so it takes up a good portion of the airplane, and if you ever look at an A-10 straight on, the nose wheel is off center. That's so that the gun can be right in the center of the airplane. And I remember the first time going to the range. I mean, we were all so excited that, we knew we were going to shoot the gun for the first time. And I remember just rolling in and, being a little nervous because I wanted to do well, but fine tuning my aim point and then pulling that trigger for the first time. And it's almost a shock because the jet rumbles underneath you. You can smell the gun gases, you can see it out in front of you. And then ideally, you hit the target and you get the instant feedback of sparkles, which is when the training bullets hit the practice tank. And so that's, I think, when I truly became an A-10 pilot was shooting the gun for the first time. But it's an
Oh
impressive
yeah.
airplane.
So that shared perspective, because I'm sure you've seen both. You've shot it from the cockpit, which I
Yeah,
never have, and you've also, I'm sure, been on the ground watching it happen, right? So big difference to the brat sound,
yeah.
or is it similar experience in the cockpit?
I think
Like,
it's
do you hear
different
that?
because I think it's a
Yeah.
a full body experience, if you will, in the cockpit because
Okay.
it's almost overwhelming because all the sensations of smelling the gun gases and hearing it, and it is loud and the whole jet rumbles beneath you. On the ground, you definitely hear the noise, but you don't get the full experience. It's the full 3D experience in
Yeah.
the airplane.
I would love, there's times when I'd be on the ground around folks that were not familiar with that sound at all, and they
Yeah,
have no idea it's a gun going off,
yeah,
And but if it's nighttime and you see the tracers, it's like a laser beam striking the
yeah.
ground. Um,
I have
Yeah,
not
just
seen it at
remarkable.
night, so I bet that's pretty impressive too.
Oh, it just literally looks like a red laser beam, burp, burp, just like touching down the
Yeah.
ground. Amazing. Oh my
Well, the
gosh,
whole
I could
point of the gun is to
such great.
be very precise and very accurate. I mean, all the fun aside of shooting the gun, it's really meant to provide that close air support because with the gun, we can get very close to the friendly location. It's very precise. And so, learning to use the gun and to shoot it and do it well so that when it comes time for combat, you have the confidence in yourself that you know where those bullets are going and you know how close you can get to friendly forces.
Yeah, amazing. So how long, from the time that you learn the A10, go through that process, you're assigned to a squadron, what was that like, after flight school, squadron selection? And
Yeah.
then somewhere in there you met Scott, right? I mean, you guys met at the Air Force Academy. So
We
what was
did.
that
We met
all
at the
like?
Air Force Academy. We met at the Air Force Academy, and we got married a few years after I graduated from the academy. And so he was off doing his A-10 missions in Korea while I was going through my training. And then we reconnected at Pope Air Force Base at the end of 2001. Um, Obviously, September 11th, 2001 was a moment that changed the course of all of our lives. For me, it happened while I was in A10 training. And so I finished up my A10 training, went right to Pope Air Force Base, and deployed a few months later to Afghanistan.
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
yeah, it happened fast. And so, before 9/11, you knew there was this idea of going to combat. I mean, that's what we train for, that's our mission. And then 9/11 happens, and it was like, we're going. And then we did. We went to Afghanistan, we went to Iraq, we went to Afghanistan. It was just this constant cycle of deployments. And so, yeah, Scott and I shared a house together in North Carolina at Pope Air Force Base. But we were in separate squadrons, which was the decision of the commanders. They did not want us to be in the same squadron. They didn't really know what to do with a husband and wife team. And so they separated us, which, at the time we understood, it just meant that my squadron deployed, his squadron deployed, my squadron deployed, his squadron deployed. So we had very little time together right after 9/11. But I think, our heart and was in supporting the mission. I mean, yes, we were newly married, but at the same time, we both believed so strongly in what we were doing and commitment to the mission and supporting the troops on the ground. And so we wanted to be there, but it was tough.
Yeah, it's an incredible story, and I can't even imagine how tough it must have been. Scott shared with all of us, and we have some united friends, if you will, because he supported Anaconda,
Right.
during that first, I believe that was his first mission there, or if not his first mission, but that first deployment cycle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you were aware that that all happened, and then boom, you're going to deploy on the backside to relieve his squadron, knowing, that we are getting in the fight and engaging with the enemy and all those things, and it's all real. It's all
Yeah. Oh, it was
real.
very real. And thankfully we had a few days of overlap in Kuwait. It's very romantic, Kuwait, in a deployed location. But, at least we had some time to talk and share lessons. I mean, that's the beauty of being in the same airframe and understanding what we do is we talked about kind of those lessons that we learned and our experiences. And I think that helped both of us.
Yeah, and it's so formative for us as operators on the ground. I have to imagine it's very similar for pilots. So, when you saw Scott in Kuwait, was there like, wow, I saw a transformation. My husband is a bit different or more poised or together. What was that like? Was there a tenable difference?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously he's my husband. I was always really impressed with him, but seeing what he did in Operation Anaconda and the composure that he had in a really difficult situation, and then the lives he saved. I mean, I was really proud of him. I mean, it was a really tough situation, and you always hope that all of your training, all that hard work that you put in, that in the moment that you're going to be able to hold it together and do what you're trained to do. And he did. I mean, he did exactly what he was supposed to do, and clearly then some. I mean, he he saved a lot of lives on the ground and in the air because deconflicting aircraft overhead was in the chaos was just as critical. And so, yeah, I was really proud of him. It showed you and reminded you that all that training, all that hard work, there's a reason for it because you never know when that moment's going to come and you need to be ready. Because sometimes there's nobody to help you out. You know, there's not a perfect answer or playbook for it. You rely on your training and you make the best decisions you can. You don't have the 100% perfect information and you just sometimes you go with your gut, but it's based on all that training. And so to see it with him was just impressive, and I think for all of us, it put everything into perspective of what we might be called to do, and everybody was very serious and committed um, to really saving lives is what it came down to. Like, we knew we had to be ready for that moment.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are all such an incredible asset to the ground forces, um, allowing us to do what needs to be done, giving us greater confidence to take some, everything's about mitigating risk when it comes
Yeah,
to warfare. And you guys were a key part of us being able to mitigate risk and take some chances, right? Chances isn't the right word, to take risks
yeah,
appropriately, knowing that we had support above us if things went badly, as well as just the eyes ahead, right? Being able to kind of give us the lay of the land of what was laying around us and maneuvering towards us and all those other things allowed
yeah,
me on the ground to make better decisions as well. And it's like that teamwork aspect is something that those of us that have gotten to experience it on this three-dimensional warfare plane that we play on is so remarkable, and that is what's the differentiator between us and other forces for sure. It's like not all these separate silos. We really do work well together as a team. And what's remarkable with the pilots is we oftentimes, especially those of you that are flying, from across the land, we don't ever get to meet you or debrief you. You check in. We have got you on our fires network. All these calm, cool, collected voices flying over our heads, and then the mission's concluded. Hopefully, we didn't have to call you in for anything, and you go refuel and fly back home, to reset for another one. And we don't ever get
yeah.
to see you again. And thank you for all those things. So I'll just tell you early in the broadcast, well, we're 37 minutes into it. Thank you so much for everything that you and your husband and all of your fellow, fighter pilots have done for us on the ground, because it's just remarkable support and it enables us to do the great things that we're able to do as well.
I have to tell
So
you that
thank you for that.
absolutely. I mean, I think anytime I've gotten the opportunity to meet up with the guys on the ground that I've supported has just been so, I don't know, heartwarming and reassuring in terms of what we do. Um, it's it really for me was my passion, my purpose, my why was supporting troops on the ground. And when we moved into Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, we actually got the opportunity on many occasions to brief before a mission, go out on the mission, and then come back and debrief. And so that relationship, that bond of working together really hit home when you actually get to spend some time together and know the impact you make. I will tell you the thing that means more to me than anything else is a note that I got scribbled on a piece of paper from some guys, and this was from Iraq. But it said, "Thanks for saving our ass over Baghdad today." And I still have it. Like, I've kept that little scrap of paper because that's it. That's why we do what we do. I mean, that's why we take the risk. That's why we put in the work. And so those moments are what really matter the most.
Yeah. So anything on that first deployment, so that's 2002 in Afghanistan that your squadron deployed. Now you guys were on 90-day or 120-day rotations?
We were on 90 days and it turned into 120 and, kind of all the deployments. We thought we were going for 3, then we'd go for 4. We thought we were going for 3, then we went for 5. And then we thought we were going for 3, and then it went to 6. So every deployment was a little bit different. We ended up just based on the mission and requirements, especially in the early days of Afghanistan, staying longer to support that mission as the need ramped up. But that first deployment for me
And,
was interesting, very quiet compared to Iraq, which happened a year later.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think if I remember, after Anaconda, things slowed down considerably because
Yep.
of, the cost and
Mhm.
everything, and, a lot more smaller objectives were taken out, no big operations really. And so how long were you guys on that sort of, A and B rotation? Was there more than 2 squadrons covering down on the deployments? I'm sure once Iraq kicked off, it got really complicated for
Yes.
you
Yeah.
guys.
No, there were more squadrons. We deployed with some time at home in between, but not much. At one point, we totaled up how much time we spent together during our first few years of marriage. It wasn't very good, so I think we just kind of tucked those numbers away. Um, but for the 3 years that I'm actually wrong. I was a pope for 4 years. We deployed pretty much regularly for that 4 years. And so we just squadrons took turn as more squadrons got in the mix and we were rotating between Afghanistan and Iraq. Then there was some more time at home. So we did get to spend some time together, but if we weren't preparing for a deployment, we were on deployment or taking time post deployment. So it was really just a constant cycle.
Okay. And then while you're in that squadron at Pope, you're the only combat female pilot. What was that environment like with your fellow pilots and everything?
It's funny, walking into that squadron on day 1, I was so nervous. I mean, I put so much pressure on myself knowing that I was gonna be the only female. At the time, I was one of 43 female fighter pilots in the entire Air Force out of about 3,500. So, if my math is correct, just over about 1%. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself. I put pressure on myself to prove myself. These are my words. I didn't want to ruin it for the women that followed me. I mean, I didn't wanna make mistakes. I didn't wanna fail. So I put a lot of pressure on myself. The truth is, I think anytime you go into a new unit, a new organization, a new team, there is a little bit of proving yourself. Whether you're just a team member or you're a leader, people are kind of watching to see how you do. And so I just poured myself into working hard and being credible. And in truth, that was all that mattered. Um, the guys in my squadron were my brothers and they looked out for me, they supported me, and it was all about proving credibility in the airplane. And, you know, uh, thankfully or not, I don't know what the right word is there, but proved myself in combat very early in my career. So the truth is, it didn't matter. Didn't matter
Yeah,
at all.
didn't matter, and I love that, and, I I can't speak for all men, but I've certainly experienced this, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias that men have when they are peers with a woman. It's such a default mechanism for them to compare themselves immediately to the woman and like, "Oh, I've gotta do better," or, "I'm getting beat by a woman," or, "A woman is smarter than me," or whatever those silly conversations
Yeah.
they have inside their internal dialogue. If they're not self-aware about it, it can become very uncomfortable, toxic, and weird, and it's usually apparent to everybody else except for that person. So hopefully you didn't experience any of that. It sounds like they just brought
No,
you in and helped you kinda get up to
they
speed.
did. I think some of the older generation, if you will, they were just not really sure how to act. They weren't really sure, they'd say, "Well, I've never flown with a woman before." And I was like, "Well, I'm gonna sound a little different on the radio, but other than that, you're just like everybody else." So, no,
Yeah.
I look back on those early days being part of the 75th Fighter Squadron. I mean, I love those guys. We deployed nonstop together. We spent so much time together away from our families, and the deployments were rough. I mean, when we got to Iraq in 2003, I mean, it was very real. I mean, it was our squadron commander had us write letters home to our families, like so that if we didn't make it home, there was a letter. And that put everything into perspective really fast. Like, we may not bring everybody home, this is real. This is, I mean, and it is. It's just the reality of war sunk in. It sunk in very,
The
very
gravity.
quickly. The
Yeah.
gravity of it, yes. Just you know, this is going to be tough. For us in Iraq, the defenses around Baghdad. I mean, when they told us we were doing close air support in downtown Baghdad, we all kind of looked at each other like they have what we called the super missile engagement zone. And it was kind of like, all right, well, if the ground guys are there, so are we. But the gravity, yes, of what we were about to do um, was very different. It was a very different environment walking in. And I was so thankful to have my brothers by my side. They were, we were all in it together and we were going to get through it together. We talked about kind of the worst case scenarios just to talk about it and then push it aside and focus on the mission. But I'm really thankful for that team that we came together in that really, really difficult time.
Yeah, and in 2003, when you launched on missions, was it always two ships, or was it four? I mean, how did you guys kind of organize? Because I know that was early on in the warfare, so
Yeah.
there were big maneuvers going on at that time.
For us, we predominantly flew as 2 ships, so you always have the mutual support of a wingman. We also flew in larger packages with other aircraft that could focus on taking out some of those enemy threats, so we could focus on supporting ground troops. That was always, that was like the warm, fuzzy blanket when you had somebody that was going out to look for the missiles while we could just focus on the ground troops. It
Yeah,
didn't
running
always
those
happen.
phase lines and watching it all happen in real
Yeah,
time, like, okay, the phase one's happening. They're mitigating these threat
yeah.
forces. And
And it
okay,
happened
cool.
so
And then I
fast.
remember those happened so fast, and that adrenaline rush, because when we were on the ground, those phase lines would happen like, okay, it's getting close to go time for us. I sure hope they got everything, and or they
Yeah.
gave us all the heads up to what's on the ground. It's oh man, bringing back some memories. That's good
Yeah,
stuff.
it was, it's still, we'd go out and they'd tell us, all right, here's where the ground troops are. Oh, by the way, there's these, missiles here, here, and here that we potentially are out there. And so we did our best to avoid them. But the ground troops move fast. So there we were.
Yeah, so 2003 Iraq. You've deployed. You're flying a number of missions, and I don't know how far it was into this deployment when you got engaged. From the enemy actually made contact with you. Can you
Mhm.
kind of walk us through that and share the bit of that story as much as you wish?
Yeah. So the war kicked off mid March. And by early April, I mean, the most of the army was in Baghdad. I mean, we had pushed in very quickly. Marines were pushing that way as well. We would actually support both the army and the Marines depending upon who needed the help. And by then, the situation in Baghdad had really gotten very intense. It was really getting worse day by day right around that early April timeframe. And so they would send A-10s up to Baghdad and we would just wait in these stacks. They had stacks all around Baghdad. Um, with aircraft stacked up waiting to provide the support as those calls came in for fire. And so on April 7th, 2003, that was exactly my mission. We took off from Kuwait. We'd go refuel. It's about an hour flight from Kuwait to Baghdad, and we'd air refuel. And then we'd go wait in these stacks and just hold. Um, and the weather that day was terrible. I mean, we couldn't see the ground below. We weren't sure we were going to be able to do anything. And then as we're waiting in the
Mm.
stack, we got a call that said, "We're taking fire. We need immediate assistance." And it was like, "All right, we're gonna figure this out." So we went over to the target area and just started looking for holes in the weather so that we could get through. And I remember I was kind of tucked in close to my flight lead, and he said, "All right, I found a hole. I'm going to dive through, and then I'll call you down when it's your turn." And I remember watching him just like disappear into the clouds, down this like small hole where you could see the ground. And then he said, "All right, Casey, it's your turn." And I just found a hole in the clouds and dove through as fast as I could. And this view, once I got below the weather, we were well low of, our normal altitude so that we could operate below the weather. And this firefight that I could see happening back and forth across the river. I mean, there were tracers and smoke. I mean, it was to me, it was surreal for a moment. Like it was everything that we trained for and talked about, but until you actually see it, was just overwhelming almost. And then you kind of cue in like, all right, we got a job to do. And my flight lead's already building the picture of where the targets are and where the friendlies are. And all of a sudden I start to see these like puffs. of gray and white smoke and then bright flashes. And I realized that, not only is there a firefight happening across the ground, but now the enemy is shooting up at us too. But again, we had a mission to do, and so we made the best plan of action that we could to help the troops out on the ground. We were tasked to take out the enemy that was hiding beneath the bridge, the North Baghdad Bridge. And so we had our friendlies were over on the west side of the bridge, or on the west side of the river, the Tigris River, and the enemy was on the east side, and they were firing rocket propelled grenades into our troops. And our guys had actually been waiting for resupply. And so we knew we had to get in there. And so we did a few passes. We decided we would just do a few passes each, and then climb up to get our energy back. Um, and so my last rocket pass is did everything, fire those rockets, watched them all come down on the enemy location, and then pulled away from the ground, trying to get away from the ground, away from the threat. And I just felt and heard this huge explosion at the back of the airplane. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, I knew immediately that I was hit. Um, I remember the nose of the airplane dumping over. Time slowed down for me. I mean, I could see Baghdad below. I could, the ground was obviously getting closer at that point. I remember thinking about ejecting and thinking that is about the last thing that I want to do is eject right into the hands of the enemy. And so, it's that
Wow.
moment. Everything kicks in.
At low altitude too. So
Yeah,
yeah. Oh my gosh.
yeah. Uh, there was nobody that was going to help me. This is a single seat fighter. And thankfully, my training kicked in. I mean, I quickly just trying to analyze the situation and figure out what's wrong. Pulling back on the control stick and nothing is happening. And so I remember, I've got this master caution light blinking at my face. I look down at my control panel and it's lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, that's telling me all the things that are wrong in the airplane. And I look up at these hydraulic lights that are at the top of the panel, and all four of them are on, which is telling me that I have no hydraulic pressure or any hydraulic fluid in the airplane. The system was totally empty. And so that meant that I had one option. Well, two at this point. I could eject. And again, I remember looking down at those ejection handles and just thinking, this is not what I want to do. And so thankfully
Wow.
we have a backup emergency system. I flipped the switch and the aircraft slowly started climbing out and away from Baghdad, which was for me
Yeah.
kind of that first moment of, all right, I might make it out of here alive.
Talk about the ultimate delayed gratification, not the right word there, but it's like you had this opportunity to just pull and hey, I don't know what's going on with this aircraft. I could just eject, take my chances, but I know at least I'm safe now
Yeah, in
or my
training,
aircraft could
yeah,
crash into
in
the ground,
training, that would have been
you
my
know?
choice, but in combat, I just gosh, like I said, time slowed down. I had these visions of riding a parachute down, and I remember looking there was this really green grass on the east side of the river, and I remember thinking, "Well, if I just could float there, maybe I could run and get away from the enemy," and just, there's that moment of like, "Well, if I have to, this is what I do what I'll do, but no thanks. I'll stay in my warm,
By God,
comfy
quit. I
A10."
am gonna yeah, fly this aircraft and figure it out.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah,
incredible. So
it was
so
rough.
now you've got to problem solve, and you mentioned that you kind of relied on your training.
Yeah. Yeah, as soon as I got hit, I I keyed the mic, which is not necessarily the first thing that you're supposed to do, but it seemed to be natural at the time, and told my flight lead that I had been hit. And, we talk about this idea of mutual support and a wingman concept, and it was absolutely critical for me in that moment because we had been combat paired. We had flown together for a few weeks, and it was like he knew exactly what I needed in that moment. When I told him I was hit, he immediately told me to start putting out chaff and flare so that if a missile came up again, ideally it's not going to hit my airplane. When I told him I was in manual reversion, our backup system, he immediately told me to start flying west because he had this situational awareness that I didn't.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
wanted me to get over to the friendly location so that if I had to eject, ideally that parachute is coming down into the friendlies. And then when I said I was having trouble climbing, he told me to emergency jettison everything off the airplane, get rid of all that extra ordnance, and so that would allow me to climb. And so we talk a lot about wingman concept and this idea of mutual support, but I got to see it firsthand how
Yes.
much that mutual support is so, so critical. Um, and then we had to get out of Baghdad. I mean, at this point, it was like, we need to get out of Baghdad. They're still shooting at us. We got to get out of the city. And we made our way south. And then it was, now it's time to, okay, here's the reality of the situation. I'm in manual reversion. This is a backup system. It's not designed to land. So, do I attempt to land or do I eject? And that was a really tough decision. I don't tough is like this understatement of a word. Um, I felt like I felt like the decision could be this difference between life and death. Like if I made the wrong choice, I could die trying.
Right.
Um, and my flight lead, as much as there was part of me that wanted him to make the decision for me, right? Just tell me what to do, it'll be easier. He said, "Casey, it's a single seat fighter. You're flying a single seat fighter, and the choice is yours, and I will back you up no matter what." Which was just, I mean, empowering and terrifying at the same time.
Third time goosebumps.
Yeah, he believed in me. Like he had confidence in me. I recently watched a video that dated back to 2003 of him recounting the mission on ABC News. And they said, "Weren't you nervous?" And he said, "No, Casey's a good pilot. She could fly that airplane." And his confidence in me gave me confidence in myself. I mean, I had come to that cockpit prepared. I knew what to do. I had trained, I had practiced, I had done all of these things. And so, as hard as it was to make the decision, I felt very confident that I could land the airplane successfully. And so I made the decision that I was going
Yeah.
to try it, knowing that I
And
could
so,
still eject if I had to.
yeah, I mean, the A-10 is supposed to, well, it's able to withstand incredible amounts of damage and
Yeah.
still stay airborne. You're sitting in a titanium, um,
Bathtub.
cockpit, right?
Yeah.
It's like a bathtub, right, to kinda help protect the pilot as
Yeah.
well. And do I remember is there's 2 hydraulic systems, right? So there's a backup hydraulic system, and so both of those were taken out by this
Correct.
missile that hit you.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know what the odds are that happening, but I'm sure it's very low odds. I mean, that's
Yeah.
why almost no one's ever had to land. I think there's one other person that's ever landed in revision mode,
Manual reversion, one person
manual
landed.
reversion
It's
version.
one so 3 attempts. One pilot was killed when he attempted to land. That was one of the first attempts, and we learned some lessons from that. Another pilot got the airplane on the ground, and then the airplane was destroyed because he swerved on and off the runway several times. No braking, no steering. And then there was this like glimmer of hope. There was this one pilot that had done it successfully in Desert Storm, but the important thing, right, is that I knew about those stories because people had shared them. People had shared the lessons learned, and each time, they were documented. We shared those lessons learned, and so in that moment, I knew about those stories. I mean, those pilots weren't with me that day over Baghdad, but I could hear their stories play in my mind of what had happened and what I needed to do and what did they learn and what could I do differently.
Yeah. And so now you're flying in this manual revision,
Reversion.
right?
Yeah.
Reversion. I
Yeah.
got it now. Manual reversion.
Yes.
You've got your wingman helping you keep your confidence level up. You know you're
Yep.
the right person in this scenario and you're walking through it. But I just want to compliment you on the amount of grit and fortitude to like, yes, you've got these pilot stories in your head. You've got your wingman adding to your ability to communicate and see a bigger picture and help kind of coax you in. But to be able to shut out that like, hey, not only do I have to fly this plane, I also have to land it,
Yeah.
like if everything goes as I'm hoping it does, I'm going to be landing this aircraft in an incredibly challenging, you know, situation that I've not ever done before, only in training. I think you said you did it one time, to see
So
what the
we
plan handled like in
yeah,
that regard.
you practice flying in manual reversion one time, but you don't ever attempt to land. It's too dangerous, and so we don't practice, or we didn't practice it. Now, as a result of this mission, we practice it in the simulator at least. So if you crash in the simulator, you get another go. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's not something that I train for. It's not something that we practice, but thankfully, I had the stories of the pilots that came for me. And I mean, I was I scared? Yeah. I mean, I was terrified. I didn't think about being scared at the time. There were moments of wondering if I was going to crash. Was I going to survive? Was the airplane going to make it back? Was I going to live through this? And I could hear those thoughts come in, and I would just have to tuck those away for later, right? I could not focus on that. I had to focus on what was most important, right? What was most critical, and that was just flying the airplane. And so, yes, there were those thoughts of doubt, had to turn them off, come back to them later.
Yeah. Turn that voice off.
Yeah.
So you've dumped all your ordnance. I
Yep.
suspect were you flying with auxiliary gas tanks?
No, no,
Okay.
we
So
weren't.
you had the fuel on board that you had.
Mhm.
And so like, what was that timeline of like, okay, I've dropped my stuff. I'm getting used to flying the plane. I've got my wingman kind of talking me on, and like, how much time is happening between then and when you're starting that approach? Because I have to imagine you're learning all these things and getting more confidence in your ability to handle the aircraft under this new, reversion.
Mhm.
And it's always got to be in the back of your mind. Hey, if it starts to go badly, I can eject,
Yeah. Absolutely. I had an hour to fly the airplane. So I actually,
Wow.
which was nice. I mean, I had an hour to kind of figure it out and get a feel for it. And all in the back of my mind, I always knew I had this opportunity to eject. I felt confident I could land the airplane. As I flew the airplane more, I felt very confident in how it was flying. It was still incredibly difficult to fly. There was this mental exhaustion associated with flying it back, but there was a physical exhaustion as well. And thankfully, again, I knew from other pilots I could fly with, change hands on the stick so my arms wouldn't get tired. The airplane, if I let go of the stick, just wanted to do these spirals because I had one thing out on my wing and it was a really heavy left wing. And so it was fighting that the whole way back. But I really got a feel for it in that hour. And it was just trying to stay focused in the hour and really focus on going through different emergency procedures and walking through and mentally preparing myself and visualizing how this would go and walking through
Visualizing.
it. Yeah, we took the time to visualize to like, okay, if this happens, then we'll do this. If this happens, then we'll do this. When we cross into friendly territory, we're going to do a controllability check. We're going to get a feel for the airplane. So we had, kind of a step-by-step plan and also if this happens, then we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. And I say we, I mean, it was me and the airplane, but I had that mutual support. And so, yeah, we tried to make the most of the hour and do everything that we could to prepare as best we could for the actual landing. We made a decision to bypass a base in Iraq that we had uh, U.S. assets at the time. Because they only had one fire truck. They did not have a hospital. Those are the kinds of conversations that we were
Right.
having, that if I crashed, what kind of facilities would they have? And so we made the decision to go all the way back to Kuwait because they had full capability to handle a aircraft crash. Um, it's better to just talk about those things, acknowledge them, and make sure you've kind of thought through it all, plan for kind of the worst case scenarios, those contingencies, and then again, shut the voice off and focus on the positive, focus on landing the airplane.
Yeah. And, shut the voice off. And yeah, I've worked with enough warriors, I put you in that class of warrior for sure, 100%. Um, that I'm going to jump to a conclusion here that you didn't land that aircraft in that mode to prove something.
Oh God, no.
You landed that aircraft. No, because you landed that aircraft because you knew you could.
Yeah. I mean, I was
Am I right?
confident I
I
could,
mean,
yeah, I felt very confident I could land the
yeah,
airplane after flying it for an hour. I felt confident, and a lot of people asked why I chose not to eject. I mean,
because that
y-
would have been the obvious safe
yeah,
bet for most people is get back to Kuwait safely,
mhm,
find a place to jettison the aircraft safely and eject. Like,
yeah,
okay. And nobody would have blamed you for it.
no, not at
But
all. I
that's
mean,
why like that warrior mindset of like your self-confidence in yourself.
yeah.
Self-confidence in yourself. Good job, Bob.
I know what you mean.
One, I'll blurt something or whatever else, and it'll all be good. I'll decide whether I keep this in later or not. But your confidence in yourself allows you to make the best decision you can make in the moment. And,
Yeah,
I feel it's us fortunate few that are able to live in those moments and make those decisions and walk away from them. And it's sort of, events like this. I don't know if you shared this experience, but when I was wounded in 2007, it shattered my confidence.
yeah,
I didn't do anything wrong. It was just the circumstances of what the enemy was relaying to me and while I was trying to protect my guys. But it crushed my confidence, and it took me a long while to kind of get myself back in that mode. But in no way did I question any of my decisions or anything because I knew what I was
yeah,
doing was right in that moment. And so, like,
yeah,
my hat is off to you, because it's really just remarkable. I'm just really in awe of that whole process of you guys being able to communicate clearly, all your training working.
yeah,
Um, but at the end of the day, you're a single seated pilot, a fighter pilot having to make the best decisions you can. But your state of mind of being like, okay, I've got this. Like that's incredible, really incredible.
yeah. I think I knew that I had prepared for that moment. I mean, I knew all my aircraft systems. I knew what happened when they fail. So I had a really solid understanding of the airplane. I had practiced. I mean, not exclusively for this exact situation, but I had practiced by, we call it chair flying, which is a visualization technique where you think through critical steps that you'll face. And so I think when you do that, when you have that time to visualize and think through something, especially a stressful situation, it prepares you for that moment. It helps you to be able to take action and cope with that stress. And then I had planned for contingencies, right? We had briefed kind of the worst case scenarios. We briefed what happens if someone gets hit, so we had a plan. And so I think all of those things prepared me for that moment to make the decision to take action, even when I was afraid. I can say that now. I couldn't say it 20 years ago, but I can say it now.
Yeah,
Yes, I was terrified, but I did it. I was able to take action and get the airplane on the ground. And sadly, the airplane never flew again, but maintenance was able to take all the pieces and parts out of that airplane to help fix some of our other aircraft. So a little sad on that end, but
and you have a piece of the aircraft behind
I
your
do.
right shoulder
Yes,
there.
that's the tail cut out of the airplane. Once they realized that they weren't going to be able to repair it in the time frame that they had, they asked if I wanted a piece of it. So they cut out the tail for me, the tail flash. I also have the stick, which maintenance later gave me as a gift. Um, so yeah, there's pieces of the airplane now all over the United States in different museums, and they actually took the airplane itself after it was repaired,
Mm,
not to fly, but to sit on a display. So it is now in at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base on display. So it still lives, just not exactly in the same way that I had
my
planned.
goodness. Yeah. Wow. And I'm a huge fan and believer in visualization, and I love that's
Mhm.
incorporated in pilot training. I had to imagine that it would be. Um, if I look back on some of the things that I've accomplished that I thought were darn near impossible, or I'm not sure how I did them, I can correlate them back to my confidence in visualization, and
Yeah.
using that as a tool. And did you were you able to do any visualization before you landed that day, or are you calling back to how you did the rehearsals, or were you doing visualization on what you're gonna do as you're gliding that aircraft in for final?
I think both. I think back to the visualization and chair flying that we had done before the mission. And
Yeah,
then kind of once I was in the cockpit, it was more of like thinking through all the steps. Okay, once I get on my final approach, what are those things that I need to do? I mean, everything had failed. I had to get the gear down through different procedures. So not just waiting till I did it, 30 miles earlier, I could take the time and go, okay, so these are the steps that I'm going to take. Here's what I think should happen, and just walk myself through it. And that mission, I think, had so many impacts on my life because now, I mean, I'm not flying the A-10 anymore, but I still use those same techniques. I still, you know, when I start feeling fear or anxious or worried about something, and these are things like these aren't life or death situations. These are, I have to have a tough conversation with a teammate, or as a leader, I have to give someone some feedback that they're not going to like to hear. Those are hard things. And I feel nervous. I feel anxious about those things. And so I kind of go back to my roots, right? I take the time and I sit down and I make sure I've done all the preparation, and then I practice. I actually think through it. I visualize the things that I'm going to say, how the person might respond. I also think through that, those contingencies, those things that could go wrong. And so I learned the importance of it in training and in flight and aviation and combat, but I've shifted those things and now I use them in my personal and professional life as well.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And, as a mentor to folks, I bring in visualization all the time.
Yeah.
And I love your addition of like when you have that feeling of anxiousness or like you may not be fully prepared or ready, you revert back to going through those steps to help achieve those things. It's so
Yeah.
critical. So
It's so,
critical.
I mean, it's just so helpful for me. I mean, I think we've all felt a little bit overwhelmed recently with the pandemic, and there's moments of kind of just, how do I recenter myself and get me through those difficult situations, no matter what they are, and it's just taking the time to think through them a bit and give yourself that vote of confidence, if you will, that you've got this. You've done the work. You've put in the work.
Yeah. Okay. So you land.
Yes.
Do you remember all the details of like that final approach before wheels touching down? Or is it,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Whew, yeah. I remember touching down, and then, which was a huge, huge relief. Sorry.
Oh,
The thing I remember the most is like hearing all the guys from my squadron on the radio. And clearly I remember it. I remember just hearing their voices and being so thankful, like being on the ground with them and hearing them welcome me home. It was like just this, to hear how relieved they were and thankful they were, and saying things just, they, all the voices just coming from different places, from the air traffic controllers to the guys that were on the ground waiting if I was going to eject, that were going to come get me. I mean, just this overwhelming sensation of being part of the team and how happy they were to have me back. And I remember them saying things like, "Nicely done, Casey," and "Welcome home." And it just hit home, it was like they were my brothers. They were just as happy as I was to have me on the ground. And so, yeah, I remember it very clearly, that more than anything.
yeah, that bond of unconditional love for your teammates,
Yeah.
and appreciation for what we all do for one another because that's the team. Everyone's relying on each other.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then
and
just hopping out of the airplane and kind of being surrounded by people that cared about me, that were, thankful I was home. And I mean, we all looking at the airplane amazed that it made it home, but just that sense of being there to support each other and get each other through those difficult moments. And yeah, they were truly my brothers and sisters in arms.
yeah, remarkable. And Scott was, back home, I think, right? And like
Scott,
he got like a
thank
heads
goodness
up.
Scott,
Okay.
he was sleeping during all of this. So yeah, he was asleep. He was on the ground actually, working with a bunch of special operators, providing air advice, if you will. He was an advisor, and he was asleep because he was working a different shift, and
Mm.
woke up and uh, went in to go to work. And on his way in, the three-star in charge said, "Hey, Soup, I'm glad your wife is okay. Glad she made it back safely." And he kind of looked at him and just kind of nodded his head, didn't really say anything, because I think he was like, "Oh, what had just happened?" And he went into work and found a note on his laptop, because I had called to talk with him. And the note said, "Hey, Soup," his call sign, "your wife got hit over Baghdad, but she's okay. You should give her a call." So, yeah, that's how he found out. And
It's
then
the realization.
yeah, Yeah. So thankfully, because we were both in deployed locations, we both had access to secure phone lines, classified lines. We were able to talk after. Of course, there were like 20 people in the room on either side, like listening into our conversations. So,
Most awkward phone call in the
oh yeah,
world. Yeah.
with the delay, it was. I mean, it was not great, but it was nice and reassuring. Probably more so for him to to know that I was okay.
Yeah. And then, so what was the remainder of that? Like, so after that, I mean, obviously the lessons learned, you guys did the debrief on, all those other things that you could kind of take away from that and prevent it from the future and share all those
Yeah,
experiences. And then, you know, did you continue to fly on that deployment?
I did. Yeah.
How important was that to get back in the saddle, right?
It
Wow.
was. It was really important. I think I was actually assigned to sit combat search and rescue alert, which is normally a day where we we relax, we catch up on sleep, because we are in an alert shack next to the runway. And for combat search and rescue, we only launch if somebody gets shot down, which is not very regular. And Unfortunately, on April 8th, so on this day that we were supposed to relax and kind of regroup and catch up, we got a call that an A-10 had been shot down. I mean, the alarm sounded. It wasn't a drill. We ran out to the airplanes as fast as we could. We stopped to get our gear on and then just made an immediate launch. And then spent 30 minutes just asking questions. Where is the pilot? What's his condition? Where are the closest helicopters that we can escort in to pick the pilot up? I did not have time to think about the fact that I was going right back to Baghdad, right where I had escaped my own shoot down. All I could think about is there is this guy on the ground, this pilot on the ground who needs our help. And those same pilots that were sitting alert they were there, they were ready to launch for me the day before. And so I was going to do everything that I could. So I didn't think about it. I didn't have time to think about it, which was probably the best way to get back in the airplane. Was just get right back
Yeah.
in.
And I'm a little bit cognitively challenged. Was your event happen on April 7th?
Yes, so this was the day after.
So you're fucking less than 24 hours later?
Yeah, yeah,
Wow.
just about 24 hours, yeah. So, it was the best way to get back in the airplane to just go,
Yeah.
and then, I flew many missions after that. I Several missions for the next several months that we were deployed.
Yeah.
There's a war going on. I mean,
Um,
we needed every
the
pilot we
pilot that
could.
got the pilot that ejected on, April 8th, do you know him?
I do, he's so lucky. Things happen, I don't know, for a reason, I suppose, but
I do.
clearly this
Absolutely.
turned out well because I'm kind of laughing about it now. But on April 8th, when he got shut down, he obviously was terrified. He hit the ground, he gathers up his parachute, runs to a ditch, and is just, terrified and hears movement and vehicles. And then he hears, "Hey, pilot dude." And so he knows they're Americans, just based on how they call for him. Some ground troops had watched him eject and went over to get him. I mean, he was so incredibly
Oh, wow.
lucky. So we only made it about 30 minutes into Iraq before they told us to turn around. And to be honest, at first we didn't because we were like, we're not turning around. There's a pilot on the ground. And,
Yeah.
we're not, there's radar. They're not stupid. They can see us still pressing forward into Iraq. So they finally said, "Hey, the pilot's been picked up. You can turn around." Lucky,
Yeah.
lucky.
Things definitely happen for a reason. I
Yeah,
mean, we both experienced enough sort of things in life to realize that there's not many coincidences, so just amazing. And so you come back from that deployment, obviously you've done something that no one else has done before, been exposed to stuff that was new to the environment, in that type of warfare and everything. Um, Now you are this national treasure, so to speak, for the Air Force. I mean, really, and I think that's sort of like you've said, it's sort of hit your trajectory for the rest of your career.
yeah,
Um, Impressed people, your courage under fire, all these things that you accomplished, that's what we look for in military leaders. And so for a woman, right, to put you in that category of a woman warrior military leader, like just wow. And like the people that worked with you and around you just must have been like, just felt just you just must have oozed inspiration to folks and things of that nature. So what was that
Yeah.
pivot like for you? Because pilots, you're leading yourself in your aircraft, and it's incredibly hard. You've got to know all the systems and all these troubleshooting and all this stuff. And leadership isn't necessarily something that's like taught to you. I mean, obviously, you had it during the Air Force Academy and all those things, and you obviously were exemplary at it to be recognized as you were in the Air Force Academy. But what was that pivot like for you when you started taking on more leadership roles in the organizations of the Air Force? And not pilot focus, which I know you flew for the remainder of your career, but I mean, you're really wearing a few hats, in that environment. What was that like for you, that transition to more leadership like roles?
Yeah, I mean, first off, really just wanted to be a fighter pilot. I didn't
Mhm.
wanna be known as this female fighter pilot, but I also realized, thank thankfully, I had some good mentoring at the time when I wanted to turn down every interview and I just wanted to fly. And I realized also that it was important for young girls, especially, to see that this was something that they could do. They could be a fighter pilot if they wanted to. And so I
Because
understood that
2003, that was
yeah.
early in
Oh,
the
yeah.
commitment of allowing women to operate in that environment. I mean, when we
Yeah.
started bringing the cultural engagement teams, which were, our females that could help work with the interpreters and, help, with that culture gap, we didn't start employing them until like 2006, 2007,
Yeah.
so just really
I've
remarkable piece for you.
Yeah, and I felt like I had a responsibility
Yeah.
to share my story and share my lessons. So even though I just wanted to hide and just be a fighter pilot and just be part of the squadron, I also understood that I had a responsibility. And I felt like if I was, maybe there's something behind this. Like if I thankfully landed safely. So now I have a responsibility to share those lessons that I learned from it. And I think, you talk about leadership. There were so many leadership lessons that I learned as a young wingman, as the follower. I got to see a leader who empowered his team. I got to see a leader who believed in their people and trusted in their expertise. And so that I carried that with me to my leadership roles. I understood what it was like to really connect and bring a team together in really difficult times. And so, yeah, it absolutely set the stage for the rest of my career to be part of something so important and to see leadership at its finest in a really tough moment. So there were a lot of lessons that I took from that mission that I've tried to carry with me as a leader as well.
Yeah, and I mean, your personality, you're just such a natural, the bit that you and I have been able to engage and have conversations, um, I'm sure that served you very well too, but you've always come across to me as this very humble person, leadership, leading through empowerment and empathy and servant leadership and all those things. And those sort of the traits that you were trying to, you know, portray while you were taking on these larger roles.
Yeah, I would say I've evolved in my thinking about leadership over time. I think in my very early days of leading, I had this view of this leader on a pedestal, if you will, like this leader that I thought I should be and how I should present. And over time, I've realized it's really just important to be authentic to who you are. I mean, I had this moment taking command of my first squadron, which was about 150 people, and instead of like sitting in the seats like, a good 3-year-old would, my son decided to make his way up on the stage and sit with me in my lap on the stage in the middle of this very formal ceremony. And I was like, of course, I love my son. I was smiling at him, but in my mind, I'm thinking, what is my team going to think of me? I'm supposed to be this combat proven fighter pilot leader that's going to be in charge of the squadron, and I I can't even control my 3-year-old son. And then I just had this moment of clarity where I was like, you know what? This is me. I am human too. I don't have all the answers. I certainly have my own challenges. I'm not perfect, and I just realized like, all right, here I am. This is me and who I am. And after that ceremony, the feedback that I got from everybody was like, "Oh, we loved seeing your son up there. It showed us that you weren't just this scary combat fighter
Human.
pilot." Yeah, I was human. And so that connection, I realized, over time, like I'm not just a fighter pilot, right? I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a leader, I'm all of those things. And so letting my team see me for those things and really driving connection and caring about your people, I realized how important that was. Not just because I had this realization, but because my young team gave me the feedback and said that that's what we want from a leader. We love that,
Yeah.
and it created this connection that I think I might not have had otherwise.
Oh, that's just tremendous. Yeah, I love that observation of like the boss is the person that tells people to do things, and the leader is someone who inspires people
Yeah.
to get things done or asks them to do things. And
Yeah, thank goodness my 3-year-old son is the one that, like, kinda just flipped that switch for me of like, "Hey, you're you. You just gotta be
I
you. You
love
gotta
that
be authentic
story.
to who you
Yeah,
are."
I absolutely love that story. I'm confident you would have found that same path because you
I
are a
hope
very
so.
authentic and genuine person, and that's like, those are the things I love about our team at Victory Strategies is like, we are all these authentic, genuine people. That's our culture. That's what we kind of lead with. And it's just so important. And that's what all that everybody in your environment, you were leading multiple generations. At some
Yeah.
point at your commands, I'm sure you had everything, you know, from maybe not baby boomers so much, but probably a few, all
Mhm.
the way to some Gen Zers, and
Yeah.
like you have to approach each of those categories differently. But what I have found wins is being authentic and genuine and not being the someone that says point and take that hill, right? Like that's like
Yeah.
the model is often given out there, especially in the military, this like autocratic, leadership style is like what people expect, I think, as a default. And all the
Yeah.
best leaders I've ever had in my career were not that person. They were
Exactly.
inspirers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are moments in combat, right, where, there's not time for a
You
conversation.
have
You're gonna
to.
do what the leader does says to go do, but I think, when we talk about an everyday leadership environment, it is about building those connections. It's about showing that human side of leadership. It's about taking the time to really get to know the members of your team, to find out what they value, what their experiences are, what their struggles are. I don't think it sounds easy, but it's hard. It's hard to kind of have the courage to go out there and do that and really connect with people and get to know them to show that human side of leadership. And that's that is really what I love about the Victory Strategies team. Like you said, I think it's all these people with these amazing stories. Whether it's in combat or at the Olympics, it's it's this true group of leaders who are passionate about what they do and have realized that the experiences that we've had might be unique based on our background, whether that's, again, military or business, whatever it is. Sharing those lessons, they're the leadership lessons are very transferable to personal and professional life. And so, like I said, I feel like I have a bit of a responsibility to share those lessons, and I don't want anybody to have to go through what I went through, but I want them to understand the lessons and the messages, the important things that came out of that. I think we all have a bit of a responsibility to share those things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, that sense of responsibility and giving it back, right? And paying it forward and building the
Yes.
future leaders of tomorrow. And so you're not just helping the private sector, through victory strategies, but your last tour was at the Air Force Academy. And I know that you and your husband and a lot of our affiliates are continuing, to engage with the cadets and young future leaders, like, and so what is that? I mean, you've only recently retired, so
Yes.
the sample for you is not that broad just yet. But I know subconsciously and mentally you've been in that sort of retired mode for at least a few months. What's it like for you now going onto campus and talking with young cadets and everything? Do you catch it a little bit differently than you did when you were full on in uniform, or
Oh, I don't
what?
know. I think for me, finishing out my career as the director for the Center for Character and Leadership Development at the Air Force Academy was just like this perfect closure. It was a perfect way to finish where I started. I felt like life had kind of come full circle. There were so many people that impacted me throughout my career, so many mentors and coaches and people that were important to me. And being at the academy and having an impact and sharing those lessons and sharing those stories with the next generation of leaders was, heartwarming to see. Just they were all in. I mean, just like we were when we were at that age. I mean, they're excited, they're nervous, they're anxious about getting out there and serving, and to be part of that and to mentor the next generation of leaders was absolutely um just the best way that I could have finished out my career. So I think, I've had some time to reflect on my 24 years of service, and I there's so many lessons and so many things that I've learned. I mean, there's the ups and the downs, the good and the bad, and I try to share that with everyone. It's not all good. It's not all always going to go your way, and so kind of sharing those lessons learned and helping that next generation of leaders. I think we owe it to them to share the stories. To talk about our experiences, because I know how much those stories help me and the messages and the lessons help me. So it's a great way for me to finish it out.
I love it. And curious, 20 years later for the future female, pilots coming out of the Air Force Academy, how much, if at all, has it changed since you went through? I mean, I'm sure more numbers, but is the environment, has it adapted any, or what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment specifically for fighter pilots, and we went from 1% to 3%. I think there's just over 100 female fighter pilots in the Air Force, so the numbers are still pretty
My
small.
good.
But the Air Force
Yeah.
leadership has really been good about um, fixing some of the areas where we weren't as good. And I think this is Department of Defense wide, and that we're finally getting equipment for women that fits them. Finally finding ways that our survival vests and G suits, all of those things that we wear in the airplane, that, for me, I had them specially fitted. Nothing really ever fit right. My young airmen were always so good about trying to make these modifications, but now we're really trying to find those things so it's standard now. The Air Force Academy itself has gone from 12% women to when I was there to now almost over 30% women. So the numbers overall are really increasing. And I think, you know, being the only female in a fighter squadron was certainly tough. And now watching that there are a number of women in fighter squadrons, it's just really it's heartwarming to see, because not because they're women, but I love seeing how good they are and how passionate they are about what they do. I mean, they just I love it. It's we've made some progress. We're not quite all the way there, but we've made progress.
Yeah, I'm just like I'm in awe for what you all do and what your capabilities are. I mean, talk about top of the tier and the level of professionalism. And I've made some remarks, I think, on other interviews I've done with Air Force. Is from a joint perspective, from a Navy SEALs perspective, when I got to work closely with my Air Force brothers and sisters, the level of professionalism and the continued professional military education that the Air Force provides is the best in DoD. I mean, I'll just say that flat out, and I don't think anybody would doubt, my assertion there. And it plays out very well in this joint environment, and it's not like I never got like my Air Force, teammates like standing tall or like better than you or whatever else. It was like, no, no, it was part of the team. And my first exposure to it was when I went through the Joint Senior Enlisted Academy down in Tampa, and the Air Force, they were all gentlemen in that course, were better prepared than the rest of us for what we were learning in strategic planning and all those other things. And they just dove right in and helped all of us get up to speed to better the entire cohort and the experience, because that was the joint team environment. I have so much respect and admiration. I built a lot of great friends and comrades over the long term because of that professionalism that you guys have. Um, just awesome. So I'm going to pivot. So, the experience for your boys, having two fighter pilot parents, and now have, Scott left service a little bit before you, the family dynamic, you guys are very close there. You're still, in town in Colorado Springs or whatnot. And like, so what's life like for the boys these days, having, these incredible parents that are no longer in the military, but still so closely affiliated. I mean, you guys are pretty much like rock stars on the mountainside there, you know. So what's it like for your boys?
Try to convince our kids of that, you know? It's funny, kids have a unique way of putting things into perspective for you. The
Keeping
entire
us grounded.
Yeah, exactly. The entire time for me flying A-10s, you know, my kids, they're pretty young at that, you know, through all of it, and they're only 9 and 13 now, so, their experience of it was, you know, mom goes out and does this stuff. We would bring them to air shows, and they were more interested in the fire trucks than, you know, the airplanes. And then finally, in my last A10 assignment, I got the opportunity to bring the kids out on the flight line. We got them in an A10 simulator. They got to climb in the airplane. Uh, and they were old enough to kind of realize, like, this is what you do. And so they started to think that we might actually be okay, like we might be cool parents. Um, but you know, kids do they keep us grounded. They put things into perspective for us. And my kids are both seem to have a desire to go in the military. Our older one is interested in going to the Air Force Academy, and the younger one is interested in going to West Point. So, you know, we've got it
Oh,
covered. Yeah, one of them, the older
yeah.
one's interested in flying, the younger one is interested in going into special operations. So they're 9 and 13. We'll
Oh,
see,
good.
but, I
Yeah,
love that
yeah,
they have
yeah.
a desire to serve. I mean, I think there's many ways to serve, and I love that they have a desire to serve, whether it's the military or in some other way, but I love that part. We might have
Yeah,
done something right,
that's
I don't
awesome.
know.
Yeah, yeah, you know, and I don't know if I'll ever come to regret this statement, but at my retirement ceremony, um, I presented each of my children and my mother and my sister with my Purple Heart. You know, they each got a small one, and I made the statement to them that like you've already served.
Yeah,
You know, like you're under no obligation based on what they had to go through.
yeah,
In our lifestyle,
yeah,
but I say that I would not be surprised if at least one of my children says like, "Well, nope, I'm going in and doing my part." Because we talk about it. We talk
yeah,
about the environment and the call to duty that, and the lifestyle that we are so fortunate to live. And, I feel all the time that we've won the birthright lottery, be randomly being born not just on this planet, but, in the United States of America, and there's a responsibility, I feel a sense of responsibility to kind of protect this way of life and to model good citizenship for others. It sounds like you've done really great with your boys, and they see that, on the daily, and so I'm curious to see how it unfolds for my children.
yeah, you know, I think more than anything, I want my kids to be happy. I mean, I love the idea of service, whether it's in the military or something else, and
Yeah.
I don't know, there's part of me as a parent that it makes me nervous too, right? I now know how my parents felt when in 5th grade, decided I was gonna go off to the Air Force Academy. I mean, I'm sure I've put my parents through some pretty rough times, you know, knowing I was in combat and deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sure that's very hard for them, but I also know how proud they are of me and my service. And like you, at our retirement ceremony, we gave our kids a children's military service medal as a way of thanking them and realizing, you know, just recognizing them for the service that they provided as a military child. I mean, my older son has been to 4
It's a
different
huge
schools. I
sacrifice.
mean, yeah, it's huge sacrifice, and you're absolutely right. There is no requirement for them to serve or to go, you know, to go into the military. I want them to be happy. I want them to commit to the community, to the country in whatever way that works for them.
Yeah.
But it's hard for a parent, you
Well,
know,
and like you
who's
said, yeah, but there's so many ways to serve,
yeah.
and that's, and that's all I would really ask of my children is doing something that's more for others than for yourself,
Yeah,
because
it kinda
you'll
goes
get
back to
paid
that
back.
beginning idea of doing something bigger and more important than yourself.
Yeah,
That's what I care about.
yeah. So, what are you looking forward to in the future? What yeah, I mean, I know you've got a book that you're writing out the manuscript and getting ready to figure out how you're gonna release and do that into a book on leadership principles and everything that you kind of learned through your experience, and then if you want to talk about that, awesome. And then, what else is going on in the future for you guys?
Yeah, first and foremost, I'm excited about more time at home with my family. I think we've spent a lot
Yes.
of time apart, and so that was one of the reasons for retirement is to spend more time at home, to spend more time with my kids. But at the same time, I still feel a passion, a commitment to serve and to share some lessons, to share the experiences that I have been through. And so I've been doing quite a bit of speaking to organizations about leadership. And I'm working on a book, which I'm really excited about, that is stories and lessons about leading with courage and persevering and getting through difficult moments and facing those fears. And so I think that will be enough to keep me busy, at least for the time being. And then I also contribute my time as a board member for the Special Operations Transition Foundation, helping veterans, special operators specifically, transition into the civilian life. Because I think we've all worked really hard. We've spent a lot of time in the military, and sometimes that transition can be difficult. And so I think it's just about supporting veterans as they make the transition and really changing lives, right? When we help people make that transition, we change their lives for them and their family. And so trying to give back in whatever way I can.
Yeah. Well, so before we wrap this up, is there anything else in closing that you'd like to share with the audience, Kim?
I just want to, I guess, say how excited I am to be part of the Victory Strategies team. I think, sometimes when we leave the military, we're searching for that team and that camaraderie again. And I feel like joining Victory Strategies and being part of a team that isn't just military. I mean, I'm learning so much from everyone, from their experiences, and I think as a team we have so much to offer and to share. And so I'm just really looking forward to the journey, to giving back, and to sharing those lessons and being part of a team that's really passionate about what they do, passionate about leadership, and sharing those lessons with others.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. And, we are grateful to have you and Scott. And I view our team as it's like more than a family. It's like a combination of a family and being back in a platoon space for me. It's like, our team calls, it's all just really, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
Yeah,
And,
and I think you continue to learn, right? We always talk about this idea that you're never done learning. I think General Rand said life is a leadership laboratory. I mean, it is, right?
yes,
We have to continue to learn and grow, and that's what I love about the Victory Strategies team is that there's so many impressive people on the team with various backgrounds, and whether it's a video post or an article, like I'm continuing to learn, and I absolutely love it.
yeah, me too. I love it too. Well, Kim, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Your stories are amazing. I cannot wait for that book. It's going to be incredible. And I'm really looking forward to what we do in the future here with Victory Strategies. So, just a couple of things in closing is like huge shout out to Chief Master Sergeant Robinson. Like, if you're
Yes.
listening, like reach out to Kim. He really made a remarkable impact on a remarkable person who I'm glad to know. Um, and that desire, if it's something you want, go for it. I absolutely love that. 100%. It's your dream. Nobody else can tell you what to do with it. You just have to strive for it. And when you've got that negative voice coming in your head, just learn to turn it off. Focus on what's in the present moment right now. Really great, valuable takeaway there. And the importance of visualization that Kim talked about multiple times on this interview, and I'm a huge believer in it. And for the parents out there, teach your children young about the power of visualization. You'll be really surprised at what they can do and take away from it. And then ending it with leading with courage. And Kim is an exemplary example of that and has always led with courage, talks about it in such a humble and approachable way. I'm just really fortunate to call her a teammate and a friend. So, Kim, thank you so much.
Thanks,
And
Bob.
until next time, enjoy the episode and we'll see you on the other side of the microphone. Have a good one, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Victory Podcast, where we explore life, leadership, and journey. Please follow us on Instagram at the Victory Podcast as well as LinkedIn. and our website at victorystrategies.com, where you can also follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn. Have a phenomenal day, everyone. And until next time, I'm your host, Bob Newman, telling you all right. Have a phenomenal day. And if you're still listening, why not tune in to the previous episode if you haven't given it a listen yet? Cheers.